adaptation and adaptability become the most important resources in the 21st century, because the pace of change is only accelerating, and because the difficulty of adapting for these organizations is going to be higher and higher, because they will need to go faster and faster.
In 10 years, will you regret this? Will you regret not making your people adaptable? Will you regret not preparing them for the future of the organization? If today you want to take action, check this new episode of Asian Tide. We aim at connecting people and transmitting knowledge from fellow progressive leaders on how to actually take actions to make your people grow. At Asian Tide, progressive means that you combine three things: equality, green, and community. And today, we are delighted to have welcomed a special guest speaker who gathers the three. He is, on top of being one of the youngest founders in Southeast Asia, he is also a self-made millionaire in tech recruitment for the startup GetLinks. And this year, 2021, Djoann Fal founded the Atlas Society, a community of entrepreneurs and investors in sustainable tech. In this episode, he shares with us how he sees the future of work and how can ESG, economic, social, and governance investments can contribute in building your future.
The value chain is definitely being reinvented with this remote work, and the company who will be able to take those and turn it into advantages will be unfairly competitive.
You were mentioning Metaverse that was launched by Mark Zuckerberg last week. Can you tell us more about it? Because I'm sure like some of our audience doesn't know what is Metaverse.
So Facebook is looking at changing that way for us to interact with each other on the internet by creating virtual environments in which you can immerse yourself through glasses, for example, like the Google Glass project. Mm-hmm. Facebook is working on a new glass project, which I hope this time won't be a failure, like Google Glass. So they're looking to extend our experience through those glasses and with those helmets, which they call Quest. It's a product line of helmet, very similar to Oculus Rift. And so this enables you to interact in a 3D augmented reality or virtual reality, depending if you have the Quest. This is virtual reality. You're completely immersed in this world, or augmented reality if you wear those glasses, so you can still see what happened around you in the real world. So these are the two new interfaces, and hence it's a new business. It's a new economy, literally, that's going to emerge from that, because everybody going to want to have their own space. And so that's going to redefine work completely, I believe, as well.
That's very interesting. So if I understand well, the workplace is going to change into a more virtual reality setup where you can actually meet up. You have the feeling of meeting up your colleagues from around the world and conduct meetings. Like we are talking about hybrid meetings at the moment, because we are doing with what we have with the Zoom and Google Meetups. But actually the future of work will have this option of having virtual reality meetings where you have the feeling that you are in the meeting room. And that's a very interesting intake.
So this is not the future of work. This feature is actually live now. starting this week on Quest. So
it's the present of work then. Wow.
Yeah, many people talk about the future of work, but they just don't open their eyes. The reality is the future is here for a very long time, and it's just not distributed, right? I mean, an example is those Google Glass, right? They have been doing hybrid meetings for the past 12 years at Google in the Google X team, right? It's just that this technology were not distributed to mainstream people like us. So it's just that now you have technology that have been patented 20 years ago that now start to be swallowed by the market because the time is right. So yeah, future of work is more like a present of work. I think the future of work for real is in science fiction. You know, this is what is the future of work, but everything that is not in science fiction is already there. Right?
It's the science reality.
Yeah.
It's not a fiction anymore. I see. Okay, it's very interesting intake. Actually, it's the first time that I hear such input on the present of work. And it's true, like most of us in the mainstream doesn't look at tech in the globality. We don't have the big picture of tech. We are not following the trends on tech. And this is one lesson that I'm going to draw from this conversation with you, is that we need to check everything, all the new trends, new technology, new hardware, software that are emerging at the moment and influencing our way of work. You mentioned before that you have a big interest in sustainability. And there is a big question at the moment for organizations, especially like globally, but also at the Asian level. And a lot more are investing in ESG initiatives. How do you see the contribution of ESG in organizations?
So let me answer that question and tackle a little bit the first point of ESG, which I think is very important, coming back to this example of metaverse, right? Mm-hmm. So in ESG, you have environmental, societal, and governance. And in societal and governance, a big, parameter is inclusion and diversity. Right? It's something everybody gonna talk about now and probably the next few years. Mm-hmm. So looking at inclusion and diversity, if you look at a very practical example of a technology that people should have looked a little bit better or earlier, the impact of social media to retail sales and the inclusive impact of the people who could use those social media to the retail sales into their income. So in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, you have a generation of men and women from very young age, maybe 18, 25 years old, who've made a lot of money by selling clothes on social media. And these people, they were literally taken out of poverty for some of them. They didn't graduate from any university. Their parents didn't afford to pay their school, but they've got the chance to catch that bus and open a shop on Instagram, on Facebook, and trade dresses, trade shoes directly to consumer without having to rent a shop, offline, a brick and mortar. So these people, they have made a lot of money. Some of these people, have become very successful and at least have been taken out of the poverty through this technology. So that's an example of how, at some levels, technology can be inclusive, right? And that's beautiful, right? I believe when we talk about the metaverse, of course, the metaverse will also produce the same or probably bigger impact on poverty, right? Some people from Pakistan will be able to work as 3D designers for companies in the US and create virtual offices for them using Quest and make a lot of money from this, right? The shops of tomorrow need to be reinvented within the metaverse, right? So you will be able to take that offline pair of shoes and sell it on the metaverse, and also make money because there's so much more than social media could offer up to now, right? So that's another example. So I think technology have a inclusion and diversity power in that sense, that it can include people from literally all around the world, emerging markets, developed market together. Now, in the meantime, and that's the other edge of the sword, technology with ESG, you need to bring up one topic. It is the fact that some people will become trillionaires because technology is multiplicating their access to products' wealth faster and faster, right? And so that's something which need to be considered. And this is also part of ESG, right? So how do you redistribute wealth? Or how do you enable everybody to have equal chances in that new adaptive economy with all these new things like metaverse, electric cars, Tesla, etc., right? I think it's a big deal because if we want to achieve the SDG goals, we're gonna need to rethink that. Our generation gonna need to rethink capitalism, because you just cannot justify people that are working their whole life, at McDonald's or FMB to make $300,000, and some people that make $300,000 within half a second. And this is what technology empowers today, right? You have billionaires who literally sit on a chair and make more than 100 years of work of a construction worker within a matter of seconds. Right? This is what technology empowers. So ESG discussions gonna be around that too. And that's why I think people and HR tech and it is a very important part of ESG. Because we're gonna need to rethink how we create and distribute wealth. Now, of course, ESG is also and mainly known for the environmental part, which is about how do we save our only habitable planet. But it's a long other discussion we can have maybe with your next question.
Okay. Sure, but just like coming back to the redistribution of wealth, coming from a company standpoint, like how can organizations, big organizations who have just like transformed digitally, how can they contribute into this wealth? Because we know that the digital transformation is a long way. It's already a big challenge for our companies, and how can they take this transformation further and contribute to the redistribution of wealth?
For any SMEs out there, they just need to know what's their play in that world, right? Will they be like, yeah, how are they gonna play with this, right? So you can either ride along or die. So yeah, this is why you have to adapt, right? And adaptation and adaptability become the most important resources in the 21st century, because the pace of change is only accelerating And because the difficulty of adapting for these organizations just going to be higher and higher, because they will need to go faster and faster. So the capability for this organization to change will be their only the only key to define their success, or actually their survivability. Right? So when you understand that, you realize that how do you augment your adaptivity or your adaptability or your adaptive factors in your organization, right? So that's really the key, right? So then this is how you can produce more wealth. This is how you can survive as a company. So you can do that by probably putting an adaptive culture into your organization, right? Adaptive culture, I define it by 3 ways. Number 1 is being aware of where you are compared to where the world is going. Number 2 is analyze who in your team are the forces pushing the company to adapt, right? And number 3 is be willing to allocate time and resources to adapt, right? And so you see this organization doing it by recruiting younger talents or recruiting more technology expert talents, but that's not the only solution, right? It's also about the entire culture of the company. If the decision process of your company doesn't change, you can hire, the best CTO from Zalo. He will quit, right? Because it just doesn't fit, right? So it's an entire reformation that you need to do in your organization to become adaptive.
Do you have any advice specifically to those leaders?
Yeah, I think they need to. What I can see from my past 8 years in Asia, working with several corporate companies as my clients, recruiting thousands of people for them, right? I think we really have reached more than 30,000 people that we've placed into these companies, and all for their tech team, digital marketing teams, etc. So I think the key blocker for these companies to recruit is to recruit the next generation of leader is really the framework they have put in place to filter who is a potential talent and who is not. And this used to work where education was done at school sitting on a desk, right? But since technology talents learn from computers, from their homes, from anywhere really, if they are, the key is not really what school they have done, but how curious they are, how adaptive they are, right? And this you can't judge it from a diploma or a degree or from which school you've been to, because most of the people who've been to good school, actually they're not that curious. They just learn, what is it to be learned, or they're not that adaptive because they haven't got too many problems in their lives, right? Because their parents have been able to cover that for them. So when I see the most successful leader in corporates now, I see people that the company have taken a bet, people that didn't have come from that school that is the top school or in that domain or in that country. And I see when these companies are taking those bets, usually the people that they select and that become then those leaders really change everything. And that's diversity, that's the power of diversity as well. And they just bring new ideas. They just bring things outside of the box. Because how can you ask your team to think outside of the box if they all come from the same box? Just right?
Exactly. Yeah, totally. It's totally different. But how do you assess the potential of your talents? Like what actions?
Yeah. So how do you judge adaptability?
Yeah.
Right. How do you judge adaptability? Right. It's a good question. And actually, one of my portfolio company, I've worked on that for the past year, and to create an adaptability assessment. That company is named Adaptivity. And what they do is they assess how curious you are, what are your behavior with technology, what are your habits using technology and digital tools. And I think this is very, very great. I mean, that's the first time I've seen that. And that's why I believe it's a great thing. I think it's not easy, but for those who are interested, they can go check adaptivity.us and find the assessment there. The assessment is from 0 to 100, and that explains what area you can improve to be more adaptive. So it's like it's very similar to a Myers-Briggs test, and I think that's the only solution I know for now.
I see. I will put the link to your assessment in the description of this episode. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you, Djoann, for sharing your hands-on tips and experience with us. Thanks for listening to Asian TYDE, the podcast to drive your business growth in Asia. Stay tuned for our next episode coming out next Sunday.